It's 2 a.m. You're staring at the ceiling. Your phone is face down beside you because you read somewhere that the light makes it worse. It doesn't help. Your mind is doing laps. And somewhere in the back of your head, a thought surfaces that feels almost like guilt. Something is wrong with me. But the real answer is far stranger. You are not broken. You are running an alarm system that is millions of years older than the bed you're lying in. For most of human history, sleep wasn't one long unbroken block, it was two. Historian A. Roger E. Kirch spent years combing through diaries, court records, and medical texts from pre-industrial Europe, and he found the same pattern over and over. People went to bed shortly after dark, they slept for about 4 hours, then they woke up, not in alarm, not in distress. They simply woke in the middle of the night for an hour or two, before drifting into a second sleep until dawn. This waking period had a name, the first sleep and the second sleep, and in between there was a name for what people did. They called it the watch. During the watch, people prayed. They talked quietly with a spouse. They tended a dying fire. Some got up and visited neighbors who were also awake. Some had sex. Some just lay there thinking, the way you do at 2 a.m., except they didn't consider it a malfunction. It was simply a known expected part of the night. Kirch found references to the watch scattered across hundreds of sources. A French physician describing the best hour for conception, a Tiv tribesman in Nigeria, in records collected as late as the 20th century, casually mentioning first sleep as a unit of time, the way you might say around noon. English court depositions where a witness fixed the time of a crime by saying it happened between the first sleep and the second. Nobody explained the phrase. Nobody needed to. It was as ordinary as saying lunchtime. That's the detail that should stop you. An entire structure of the night, with its own vocabulary, existed for centuries and then vanished so completely that by the time Kirch published his findings in the 1990s, most readers had never heard of it. Two segments of sleep, separated by an hour of quiet wakefulness, had simply dropped out of human memory, not because it stopped happening to people's bodies, because the culture around it disappeared. So why did it disappear? Kirch's research points to a clear cause: artificial light. As candles became cheaper and later as gas and electric lighting spread through cities in the 1800s, nights stopped being uniformly dark. People stayed up later. The two sleeps compressed into one. By the early 20th century, the broken night had vanished so completely from common memory that when people experienced it, they assumed something was medically wrong with them. Here's the strange part. Sleep researcher Thomas Ware ran an experiment in the 1990s that tested what happens when you strip modern light away. He had a group of participants stay in near total darkness for 14 hours a night, with no artificial light, for several weeks. The first few nights were rough. People reported lying awake for long stretches, restless, unable to settle into the long darkness their modern lives had never asked of them. Then something shifted. Within about a month, every single one of them spontaneously split into two phases. First sleep, a quiet waking period lasting roughly an hour, often calm rather than anxious. Second sleep, the exact ancient pattern recreated in a lab, with no instruction, no suggestion, no participant ever told what the historical record said. Their bodies simply found it on their own, as if the pattern had been waiting underneath modern sleep the entire time, suppressed rather than erased. Ware also found that during the waking interval, participants' brains showed elevated levels of prolactin, a hormone associated with calm, almost meditative states, similar to what's measured in some animals during restful waking periods. Their bodies weren't panicking during that hour. They were, in a sense, resting while conscious, a state with no real modern equivalent because modern life gives waking and resting almost no overlap. You're either asleep or you're doing something. The watch was neither. Which means the thing you call insomnia at 2 a.m. might not be a malfunction at all. It might be your biology trying to return to a rhythm that fluorescent bulbs and phone screens have buried. But why would a body evolve to wake up at all? Wouldn't unbroken sleep be safer, more efficient, more restorative? Not if you were sleeping somewhere a predator could find you. Anthropologists studying small-scale societies that still live without electric light, including research compiled by sleep scientist Jerome Siegel, who studied groups like the Hadza in Tanzania and the San in Namibia, found something that initially seemed to contradict the whole theory. These groups don't actuate.
The wakings are the constant. The two-segment European pattern may be one cultural expression of something deeper, a nervous system that never fully checked out even in sleep, because for nearly the entire span of human existence, going fully unconscious for 8 uninterrupted hours was a gamble. Fire could die down, a predator could approach, a rival group could be moving in the dark. The brain that occasionally surfaced, checked the environment, and slipped back under had an advantage over the brain that didn't. You inherited that brain. This is where the science gets specific. Your sleep isn't one state. It cycles through stages roughly every 90 minutes. Light sleep, deep sleep, REM, and then a brief lightening before the cycle repeats. At the end of each cycle, you surface almost to the edge of waking. Most of the time, you don't even remember it. Researchers using EEG monitoring have shown that adults can have a dozen or more of these brief arousals across a single night and recall almost none of them by morning. Stress changes that. Light changes that. And here's the part that explains your 2 a.m. ceiling staring. When your stress hormone cortisol is elevated, those brief surfacings stop being brief. Instead of skimming the edge of consciousness and sliding back down, you break the surface completely. Your mind, which spent millions of years using that moment to scan for danger, now scans for the modern equivalent. An unanswered email, a conversation that went badly, a deadline. The danger changed, the mechanism didn't, which raises a question worth sitting with. What did people do with that 2 a.m. moment before it became something to fear? They didn't fight it. That's the detail that keeps showing up across the historical record. The watch wasn't treated as a problem to solve. It was folded into life, rare, quiet conversation, small tasks, rest without the expectation of unconsciousness. The anxiety wasn't about being awake. The anxiety, when it existed at all, was reserved for actual threats, not for the fact of wakefulness itself. Compare that to now. You wake at 2 a.m. and the first thought isn't, this is my watch. It's, I need to fall back asleep or tomorrow is ruined. That single shift in framing, from expected rhythm to malfunction, appears to be doing real damage on its own. Psychologist Colin Espy, who has researched insomnia extensively, has pointed to the anxiety about wakefulness, not the wakefulness itself, as one of the biggest drivers of chronic sleep difficulty, the watching of the clock, the dread of the next day's exhaustion. That layer is modern. Your ancestors didn't carry it, because they didn't expect to sleep through the night in the first place. So the ceiling staring isn't new. The shame around it is, there's a modern mirror here that's easy to miss. Think about how often you check your phone the moment you wake at night. Not out of need, but out of reflex, the same way your ancestor might have checked the fire or listened for movement outside the hut. The behavior is structurally identical. Wake, scan the environment for danger, reassure yourself, return to rest. Except the environment you're scanning now is a feed of notifications, and very little about it is actually dangerous, and yet the body still floods itself with the same alertness chemicals it would for a sound in the dark. You are, in a very real sense, still on watch. You just don't have a fire to tend anymore. You have a phone, a mind full of unresolved tasks, and no cultural script telling you that this hour is supposed to happen. That absence of a script might be the real loss, not the broken sleep itself. Humans clearly survive broken sleep for the overwhelming majority of their existence, but the disappearance of any framework for what to do with it. When the watch had a name and a purpose, it wasn't something to escape. It was simply where you were, for a while, before sleep came back. Think about what's actually different between you at 2 a.m. and a farmer in 1600 at 2 a.m. The biology is close to identical. The cortisol response, the brief surfacing at the end of a sleep cycle, the scan of the environment, all of that is shared. What's different is the next 90 seconds. The farmer reaches for a known ritual, a prayer, a few words to a spouse, a glance at the fire. You reach for a glowing rectangle that floods your eyes with blue-toned light precisely engineered to suppress melatonin, then serves you a feed engineered to be just engaging enough to keep your stress chemistry elevated. One of these calms the nervous system back towards sleep. The other does the opposite of everything your biology is asking for. It isn't that you're weak-willed or doing something wrong in some moral sense. It's that you're applying an ancient sensible coping mechanism, checking the environment after a brief waking, to an environment engineered by people whose business model depends on the. So tonight, when you wake at 2 a.m. and your mind starts running its laps, you might try something other than reaching for your phone or dreading the math of how many hours you have left. You might just notice that you are doing something ancient. Your nervous system surfaced, checked the dark, and is waiting to see if it's safe to go back under. It almost certainly is. And maybe, like every human who came before the light bulb, you don't need to fix this moment. You just need to keep your watch.